Hi everyone. In these next few videos, I'm going to show you some additional tools and techniques that we haven't covered yet that produce really interesting and cool results. The first thing I'm going to show you is this sculpting tool that lets you modify an existing mesh using a series of tools that are commonly used in sculpting clay, like in real life. So uh, this first tool is the sculpt tool, and as you can see, it's more like I'm pushing and pulling on this surface to achieve a lot of sculptural effects. So why don't we begin by making a new file, and I'll show you how to get to this. So let's go to File, New Scene, and once we're in the new scene, let's go to your Polygons tab and create a plane, polygon plane, like that. And let's, with the plane selected, let's make the width 10, the width 10, the height 10, and let's give it 64 subdivisions in both directions. So now we have a fairly dense plane. A lot of the things I'm going to show you in these next few videos require you to have a higher face count, because a lot of the detail of these brushes and these tools rely on having more faces to get finer detail. So we have this plane that's 64 by 64, and we can go to our tab called Sculpting, and if you don't see it, some of you might not have it, we can press and hold left click on this gear and go to Load Shelf, and then we browse to Shelf Sculpting Mel. So I'm going to click Cancel because I already have it loaded, but you guys should click Open if you don't have it. And getting back to this, let's click on this first tool here called, it's just the Sculpt tool, which lifts the surface. So we can click this button, and it's now active. And let's go to our tool settings, and I have steady stroke on. Let's turn it off for now, then I'll show you the difference in a bit. So if you left click on this surface, it'll begin pulling it up like this. So some of you, I'm going to Control Z this. So some of you, your brush size may be really large or small. So sort of like soft selection, I want you to hold down B, the B key, and left click and drag to adjust your brush size. And then also the M key and left click and drag to adjust your brush intensity. So you see that straight line, if we're dragging up and down, that adjusts the strength of the brush. So here, let's just click and drag. So you can also adjust these same parameters in your tool settings on the right here. And so you can see when I left click and drag size, this changes, and strength changes the thing that we had on M, the parameter that we had on M. But I like using B and the M key to adjust it a bit more intuitively, so I don't have to keep going back and forth. So we can click and drag and deform this surface. I'm going to Control Z that again. So let's turn our brush down a little bit and turn our intensity down a little bit, our strength down a little bit. And let's start dragging out, this snake pattern here. And the other thing I'll show you is if you press and hold Shift while left clicking, this smooths out the tool. So it's a bit of a modifier key. So you can keep working this and smooth out. And then control clicking actually does the invert of the tool. So now this will press down. So it's a really good idea to have your hand on the Control Alt Shift sort of zone like you've had before, but then also using that in combination with B and M to adjust the brush size and intensity. And then I'll press Shift to smooth this back down, and then let it all go to bring some other things, some other geometry up, and then press Shift to go over it again and smooth it out. And then I can, as usual, I'm pressing Alt and left click to rotate, but then I'm letting go and pressing Shift to smooth it out. And then I can do Control and then inverse some of these. And then Shift to smooth it all out again. And the other option I had on at the beginning was steady stroke, which when you turn this on and let's say left click, you'll see that your mouse has like a tail, and it's almost as if you're dragging the mouse cursor on a leash. And so what this does is gives your line a little bit of a smoother quality to it. And you can adjust the length of the leash by dragging this. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit. So when I'm using this sculpt tool, I prefer to have steady stroke on, maybe on 2 or 3. So why don't I'm going to undo this a little bit and show you some of the other tools. So let's go on down the line here. This next tool is the smooth tool, which you can use as, it's the same as holding down Shift, except this time you can adjust the intensity of the smooth. The next tool is Relax, which is different than Smooth. You can see if I turn on my edge faces, my wireframe, this actually changes the, here, let me do something really extreme. So if I drag this like really large, you can see that some of these polygons, these faces, start to get really distorted. And so with the Relax tool, you can begin to smooth that out a little bit. So you see it's actually shrinking the faces while maintaining, let's say, the overall shape of the sculpture. So sometimes this comes in handy when you're texture mapping, or when your sculpts become so distorted that it starts to look a little bit, some of the faces start to overlap. So sometimes this is really handy to smooth some of that stuff out. So as you can see, this is different than the smooth tool, which actually changes the shape of the mesh. So I'm holding down Shift to use the smooth tool on this again. So I can press Q to quit. And so the next one is the grab tool, which I actually use quite a bit. And this allows you to just grab part of the mesh and pull it. So you can see I'm doing that and that. And so on this one, holding down Control, actually, instead of grabbing it, it sort of twists it. So again, I can come back in. I always like to come back in with my smooth tool and sort of go over everything. either smooth or relax, just to make sure I'm not getting too extreme with some of these, because a lot of times I'm either texturing them or at some points even 3D printing them. So grab tool lets you actually pull faces. And smoothing. I'm smoothing it again. Okay. So this next tool is pinch. It lets you select a region and shrink it down. The next tool here is flatten. So let's take a look at something like this. And it'll take a high edge and push it down. The foamy tool. Let's turn down our faces a little bit. And so in all cases, in your tool settings, there's always a series of options here. So I think a big one is actually mirroring. So as you can see, I can do things like this, and it'll, depending on which axis I pick, it'll make all my moves symmetrical. So my brush strength is a little too high here, but so this tool, this mirror tool, is really good for modeling symmetrical objects like faces or characters. So spray tool lets me take an image and spray it like a template onto the surface. I think it'll be more, let me make a new plane here. And so I'm going to go in tool settings and turn my mirroring off. And if we drag down a little bit, we can see the stamp that the spray can is using. So you can see that in our stamp, the black represents a low value, and the whiter it is, the taller the extrusion is. So we can also go to pick stamp and choose from an array of different templates or stamps. So I can double click this, and if you can't see it, by default this window will pop up to the F check window, which is the image viewer that's built into Maya, will pop up, and you click close it. And now that that's selected, you can see that it's selected over here. So I can Control Z some of these, and you can see that this stamp will produce a slightly different result. And then you can go in with these options: flip horizontally, rotate, continuous. I highly encourage you to play around with some of these settings. Fall off is important too. It sort of defines how the brush falls off as you apply it. So let me change the fall off real quick if we did a curve like this. So you can see it's much more tapered like this curve. Or if I switch to this, these would be much more bulbous. The imprint tool lets you do the opposite. Again, you can pick a stamp like this, and when you click it, on this one you can actually click and hold to scale the rotation and size of the stamp. So that's a bit much. And so I'm actually going to invert it. It could go down. So I think that's a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the intensity down, because you can see my arrow was all the way off the screen, the size indicator. So it's more like, let's do it more like that, and also make our brush slightly smaller and just bring the whole thing down like that. And so now you can see this works a little bit more like it's supposed to. So this one's more like a series of stamps that you're pushing into the mesh. So again, I had to invert this, and with it unchecked, it pulls it up. And then you can also control click, which is the same as inverting. So you see when I control click, the brush turns white. So that's when you know you're in inverse mode. And then shift is always smooths the whole thing out. And then maybe we can go back in and relax some of these vertexes too. And so for the wax buildup tool, I'm going to create actually a new sphere in the scene. Let's move it up a little bit, and let's give it some more subdivisions. 64, 64. So as you keep dragging on the surface with the wax buildup tool, you can see that it's a bit more subtle, but it's almost as if you're moving the clay into a specific area that you're clicking on. Control is always inverses, shift smooths. The scrape tool flattens. You can, if you hold your mouse over the button, it gives you a little description too. So this minimizes or removes raised areas on a surface. This tool is called the fill tool, and it fills valleys. Maybe it will work better here. So you always have to click the surface to make it active, and then you click the button. And then sometimes you have to remember that, like, when you switch between tools, the strength and brush size matters depending on what tool it is, so you always have to constantly adjust. So the knife tool, so I think my brush is a little too large for that, and I'm going to bring down my brush strength too. As you can see, maybe that's a little too, yeah, that's fine. So that's cutting in strokes. Smear. Whoa, that's a little too crazy. Because my strength keeps jumping up depending on what tool I'm using. So smear lets you actually push the surface around. So I can press Q to quit, and then select this, and then continue going back to smear. So my bulge tool, again, as I went to that, I suspect my strength was way too high. I'm going to turn that down. So I highly encourage you to go through and play with all of these and look at your tool settings, because each one of these has specific settings sometimes. And you can use a stamp with almost all the brushes. Probably the last one that's really important is the freeze tool, which is it's a bit like masking off part of a surface. So with the freeze tool on, I'm going to paint half of the object blue. So remember, this isn't actually painting the object a certain color, but it's more like masking it off so that when I make changes, it's going to prevent me from making changes to a side of the object. So everything in blue will be unaffected by this brush. So even though I'm brushing on that certain part, because it's masked, it won't let me affect the area that's masked. So why don't we start a new file, take a break, and when I come back, I'm going to show you how to paint your models.